Hi, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, and you're with Survival International, and you were nominated as one of the Art for Your Causes contest winners nonprofit.
Yes, we're so grateful for that. My name's Marial Quezada. I'm a research and advocacy officer with Survival International. And we heard about that, and that is very exciting for us to be
Yes.
getting support from artists.
Hmm.
Moreover, I understand it was a BIPOC artist contest, and that's wonderful that we have artists supporting our cause.
Yes, definitely. And I don't know if you saw the piece. Did you see the piece?
I did. Yes, it's stunning.
It's incredible, and she really believes in what you guys are doing, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's really exciting. So I wanted to invite you on so you could tell us about your nonprofit, what you do, what kind of programs you've got going on now, how you can get other people to engage.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
go
thank
ahead.
you. We appreciate that. And yes, we appreciate too, just like I said, artists, supporting Survival International's work. And hopefully we look also for opportunities to collaborate with them. So hopefully we'll be able to engage more with the artist herself.
Yeah, through Art for Your Cause, you can do that for sure.
Yeah, so we are Survival International. We're an international NGO. We've been around for 50 years. We have offices in the UK, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, the US, of course, and Brazil. And we work in partnership with Indigenous and tribal peoples to campaign and lobby and protest for their land rights.
Hmm.
So we run campaigns, global campaigns, and worked and have worked to stop miners, loggers, and oil companies, for example, from destroying tribal lands, livelihoods, and lives across the globe. We investigate and expose and confront atrocities committed by governments and big businesses, and ultimately work to amplify Indigenous peoples' voices globally. So we have a handful of campaigns. The main campaigns we have are decolonize conservation and uncontacted tribes.
Hmm.
Um, and within those campaigns, we have certain focus areas and cases that we work on. And then we also have, which I'm most familiar with, we have a social media campaign called Mayflowers Kill, which is a awareness building campaign. I'd be happy to talk more about each of the
I'd
campaigns.
love for you to. That's why you're here.
um, yeah, and to give folks an idea of how you can get involved.
Hmm.
But so I guess for the decolonized conservation campaign, I think it would be good to just share a quote that I think illustrates one of the main points of the campaign and is from an Indigenous person. And that is that only to the white man was nature wilderness. And that's by Chief Luther Standing Bear, who's Lakota. And I think that's important to start with because it really is the essence of what we're trying to change the public opinion around with our campaign to decolonize conservation. And so, with our campaign, we try to highlight that tribal and indigenous peoples were expert conservationists long before the word conservation was dreamed up,
Hmm.
and that they have managed, as we know, and safeguarded and shaped land since time immemorial and to provide for their future generations. And that evidence proves that Indigenous peoples manage their land and environment better than anyone else. And I think a really important kind of like statistic fact to illustrate this is that 80% of our planet's biodiversity is found in tribal Indigenous peoples' homelands.
Yep.
And that's not by chance. So basically, our campaign aims to combat what some might call or know as fortress conservation, but this idea that conservation organizations know better than Indigenous and tribal peoples how to manage the land and environments. And so I think part of that is really relevant. So I work for the US office. And our positionality, and that's very like the historical positionality of the US is very pertinent because the global model for conservation today is in fact in many cases racist and colonial, and it actually originates from the US. The idea of conservation behind some of our first national parks here,
Right.
Yosemite, and Yellowstone, which the model really, it was to kick out, remove the indigenous and local peoples to bring in, people, white men, conservationists that thought they could better protect and take care of the land. And so we like to highlight that history, but within our campaigns, some of our cases that we work on in partnership with indigenous peoples are not in the US, but in India, for example. We work with the Janakaruba people who are being forcefully evicted from their lands for the creation of tiger reserves. And this is not just something that faces this people in India, but many Adivasi people throughout India face this. They are removed from their homelands, which are often in the forests, which they rely on for life, for sustenance, for ceremony, for tradition, and they're removed from their lands for these tiger reserves, or tiger corridors, as they're known. And we also work in partnership in another area, largely in the Congo Basin, with the Baka people, who are one people, but others as well face the removal, forced eviction from their forest, from their lands, for the creation of protected areas to create national parks.
Wow.
Yeah. I think one of the challenging things about this campaign is a lot of, by and large, a lot of society, especially non-Indigenous peoples, understand conservation to be a very positive thing, have not seen it as something problematic. They don't know the the dark history of it. Certainly I think the majority of society doesn't understand how much it really relies on the removal of and violation of Indigenous people's rights and tribal people's rights. And so in this campaign in particular, we try to highlight and get people to change not just their opinion, but also to take action to support these campaigns, to support these local and Indigenous peoples who are fighting these evictions, and to reframe their way of thinking around conservation. Big conservation organizations, many of which are based in the US. So the US, is a huge funder of a lot of these conservation projects, international conservation projects overseas. But big conservation organizations like WWF, who most kind of have historically seen in like a positive light, that, we need to highlight and show how these big conservation organizations are very complicit in these forced evictions, funded militarization of these lands, and often lead to the persecution and extrajudicial killings of Indigenous peoples. So a few years ago, I think it was 2019, we worked with and supported, BuzzFeed News released a 3-series piece on WWF's connection to and their abuse of Indigenous and local peoples by their eco-guards in Asian and African countries. And I think that media is one way to bring these issues to light, but so that people can see for themselves, the details that we're well aware of as researchers and working with the tribal Indigenous peoples on these cases, but so that they can see the extent of this problem and damage, and, start small by, rethinking supporting WWF, but of course also a way that we engage our supporters in our campaigns is we do a lot of lobbying and have a lot of petition and letter writing emails sent to the government officials in these countries, and also, members, staff people from the big conservation orgs like WWF, demanding that they stop these abuses.
Oh my.
Yes.
Who would have thought that this would just be such a big issue, that people, because we need to think about the effects, how these causes and how these initiatives are affecting everything, not just that we want to do something good. There's one thing to just say, okay, I'm going to create a cause and it's going to be, or a program, and it's going to be for this thing, and totally disregard anything else, any group of people, any other part of the environment, any supply chains. It's so arrogant,
Yeah, and it's quite systemic and it's historical. Like if we look at the roots of the conservation models dating back to, early 1900s here in the US, it's been around for a long time. So it's systemic, and it's something that in a way is intended to be, it can be quite deceitful. And to see the bigger picture is a little bit challenging, but yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
because of the government regulations, or is that because of the philanthropic model itself, or is it both? Or how do we get our hands around that and try to change it? How do we dismantle that?
Yeah, well, I think so. Going back to what I was saying around the way we engage our supporters to help bring about this change in our campaigns is, I think it's systemic. So it's really a combination of all of those powers and actors, which is why we don't just target the government or, those funders of, those members of the conservation organizations, but also those funders. So, we have the local governments who are complicit in this, who are working with the conservation organizations, and then those conservation organizations who have both local, members and actors, and international. And then, like I mentioned, often a lot of these international conservation organizations, especially the cases we work on, receive funding from the US. So there's government officials in the US, and then you're so many layers removed that sometimes it's our job too to bring to the US government officials' attentions that, you're funding this. This is highly problematic because it's violating human rights, Indigenous people's rights. And so I think that it's all of those. And in our different campaign actions, we're trying to target all of those different actors. And that's certainly what we ask of our supporters. And I guess also related to the Decolonize Conservation Campaign, one of our focuses right now is on this global movement to, and I'm not sure if you've heard, but this global movement to protect 30%, put 30% of the earth into protected areas by 2030. Which at face value might seem like a positive thing. People, that aren't familiar with the threats that Fortress, this giant kind of conservation projects, can create for Indigenous peoples, might think, oh, that sounds really great. We need to expand protected areas. But what we're really trying to bring to light here is that without safeguards for Indigenous and tribal peoples' land rights in particular, that many of them could be affected. This could lead to greater human rights abuses to try to create more protected areas, when often the creation of protected areas is at the disposal of Indigenous people's rights. So we are organizing actually in September, international Congress in Marseille, France, where we're bringing Indigenous peoples from all over the globe to talk about how this fortress conservation has and continues to impact them, and that why everyone needs to listen to the fact to Indigenous peoples that they really should be in control of and protecting their land and be at the table making decisions around this.
I agree, and I applaud your organization. How long have you been working with them? You seem like you're very...
Oh, me, myself?
Yes.
I've been with Survival for about 3 years.
Wow.
In a handful of different roles, but I've had the opportunity to work with our U.S. office is located on Ohlone land in East Bay, San Francisco.
Oh,
and
wow.
I also had the opportunity to work with our Madrid, Spain office at one point.
Well, they're lucky to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess that's the Decolonize Conservation Campaign. I can give you a little bit as well about our Uncontacted Tribes campaign, the other main campaign we have.
Sure.
And so this campaign, again, I'll kind of share 2 quotes. One being that the invaders, the illegal loggers, are thieves. They keep coming and threatening us. This is from Zeitata Guajajara woman from Brazil. And then another is, we cannot die like this. We cannot let the colonizers get rid of us. They came and colonized, but the process never ended. And this is from Kumataya, who is Awa from Brazil, who is the relative. Both of these women are relatives of uncontacted tribes people. And so these are we have a project survival called Tribal Voice, and it is a video platform for indigenous and tribal peoples to share any message they'd like about what they're going through. And we use these as part of our campaigns to spread their voices and perspectives. And so these are two women who are talking about how their uncontacted relatives have been affected from contact, which I think many people don't realize still happens today. There are more than 100 uncontacted tribes around the world. And they can continue to face the threat, as we hear from these quotes, of colonial contact through extractive industries, evangelical missionaries, and governments. And one of the biggest cases, I guess, components of our campaign that we've been fighting in the past few years has been the ongoing indigenous genocide in Brazil. The president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, has, he's declared genocide, war on indigenous peoples.
It's appalling.
Yeah. And so that's something that we're very focused on, is trying to, in many different cases, ensure the land protection, ensure the rights of uncontacted tribes are upheld to remain uncontacted, but you do that by ensuring that land is demarcated, that land protection orders that make it illegal for loggers and other invaders to enter tribal lands are upheld and respected. But ultimately, the president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, has encouraged missionaries to encroach on tribal lands. He's encouraged contact to be made, including by government officials. He is trying to remove these land protection orders. And he certainly is not moving forward with demarcating any indigenous land. So it's a really precarious time. And for indigenous and tribal peoples, especially uncontacted in Brazil. So that's really something that we're working on right now, trying to uphold land protection orders, trying to have land demarcated, and just trying to support, like the quotes I shared from the beginning, the indigenous peoples that are also relatives of uncontacted tribes, that tribes people that are themselves on, at the forefront, marching, taking action, defending their lands against, extractive industries, mining industries, cattle ranchers that are trying to encroach on these lands. And the contact could be made. If contact is made with uncontacted tribes, it almost always is deadly. And if not immediately deadly, it leads to, unfortunately, breakdown of health, and it can often lead to death.
So you send people, you have attorneys and you have advocates in these countries working with the local population and the local tribes.
So we work with attorneys, and we work with the local and indigenous tribal communities. We very strategically, our offices are placed in countries where we are not working with the tribal indigenous peoples, because we're in these, the European countries and the US, the global North, where often the government officials, multinational corporations are, the funding and sources of power are the ones that are behind these governments and extractive industries, businesses that are going into these tribal lands. So we often have survival staff people and partners in those countries, but our offices are strategically not located there because of the danger that could produce, and also because
that's why I was thinking I thought this can't be safe.
Yeah, we have, and I think it really helps to have that international lobbying opportunity and position to be located in Europe and the US. And I think that really helps push these campaigns. But we do often, this last, during the pandemic, of course, a lot of our in-country work was on hold because of the threat the pandemic posed for everyone, but in particular Indigenous and tribal peoples. So more kind of on the ground work in these countries, and in Brazil, for example, will be happening in this year, it seems. But it was certainly, we had to get a bit creative and rethink the ways that we were doing our campaigning, because there was a lot of course, restriction during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at your website, and it looks like you also work with factory schools.
Yeah, so factory schools.
Children.
Yeah, I actually worked a lot on that campaign at the beginning. We launched it in 2019 at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in New York City at the headquarters of the UN. And since then, we have focused more on our uncontacted and decolonized conservation campaigns. But Factory Schools campaign is certainly, it's of great importance in that the campaign is ultimately to advocate that Indigenous education be under Indigenous control and stop this ongoing creation of and support for factory schools, as Survival is calling them, which are schools designed to assimilate Indigenous and often violently assimilate Indigenous and tribal children. We were focusing on cases in India. And so that was, in an effort to stop these schools from operating essentially in India. But we've shifted a little bit away from focusing on that campaign just because of the pressures around the communities facing colonial conservation and uncontacted tribes in the present. But that is a campaign that we have, and it's very much related to our work with Adivasi communities in India.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other campaign that I mentioned that I work on, it's unique in that it's not like our other campaigns. It's just a social media campaign. And so it's really about awareness raising, but it's certainly the area that I'm most passionate about. It's a campaign, it's a public education campaign. And we actually launched it last on July 4th in partnership with tribal members in the US, in the now US. And that was in response to the 400th anniversary celebrations and commemorations of the Mayflower ship setting sail from Plymouth, England. And we saw that this was happening overseas and felt, well, this is extremely important that we do something in response to this, because the history of the Mayflower and the way that point and moment of contact really changed for not just the Wampanoag people who were there where the Pilgrims first landed on their land in now Massachusetts, but for Native peoples of North America, how that really has impacted them and continues to impact them. So for that too, I have a quote from the chairwoman of the Aquinnah Wampanoag tribe, Cheryl Andrews Maltese, and she says, "It's virtually a miracle that we're still here. We are the descendants of people who survived attempted genocide, the loss of our ancestors' lives, the erasure of our spirituality, culture, lands, and natural resources, all to a distorted perception of Western superiority and self-declared divine right to dominate other people. We are painfully aware that history cannot be allowed to repeat itself." And this is in essence, the point of Mayflower's Kill as a social media campaign. That's the hashtag that we use with all of our material. And it's a campaign centered on Indigenous voices to raise awareness about the history and legacy of the Native American genocide, and to highlight how it's being repeated in other countries and show how it can and must be stopped. Mm-hmm. So to connect that, a lot of times, first and foremost, many of us don't learn about the Native American genocide. It's a history, Indigenous history is entirely left out from our textbooks. We don't hear about it. It's outside, it's not within national discourse, maybe more recently in this past year, but prior to that, it's really been absent and erased. That's intentional. And, with our uncontacted tribes campaign, this threat of contact is actually still imminent today. It's something that Indigenous and tribal peoples are still facing, and a lot of people don't realize that. And because of that, it's really like, what's the point of learning history? Well, so that we don't repeat it. And so that's really what we're trying to push with this campaign, which is really just engaging. And I've loved it because it's engaging Indigenous and tribal peoples, Indigenous peoples in the Americas, in North America, and in countries where we don't say work, we don't have necessarily campaigns with survival, but engaging them in our work, giving them a platform as well to talk about their experiences, and also to hopefully call to action to have people act to support Indigenous and tribal peoples who are facing genocide today.
I know that in Peru, there's been a lot of activity in the last several years, but it's really stepped up in the last month or so about these uncontacted tribes that are living at like 14,000 feet, very high up in the mountains, and have been, somewhat invisible for years because of that, and now they're not, and the threat that they're facing because of that.
Yeah.
And so, I am on your side as far as what you're doing. I would love to help any way I can. Just have to keep us in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can partner with you guys. I know you're a big organization, so.
Yeah, no, but I think that just opportunities to engage with new audiences is great, because the fact that there is someone, an artist, who decides, I want to support this cause, that helps just bring awareness to our organization, but with the end goal being, bring awareness to Indigenous and tribal peoples' struggles, rights, and to really activate people to participate in our campaigns, whether it be signing a petition, sending an email, sharing for Mayflower's Kill, for example. We just want people to reshare Indigenous and tribal people's voices on social media, donating to survival. There's really endless ways to engage in our work. So I appreciate the opportunity to just chat about it, to share with new people the work that we're doing and why it's important to learn about it.
Yeah, it's so critical, especially to the survival of humans, the human species, because we can't, we need to work together if we're going to survive all the upcoming challenges that we're going to have on this planet. And I don't need to go into all those, the environmental challenges and the economic challenges, which are all, from one perspective, they're all the same, but they're, it's just, we need to be supportive of all cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, Indigenous people's rights are human rights, are, as you say, survival's model is for tribes, for nature, for all humanity, because exactly that, like, you can't see nature as separate from humans, and certainly not separate from Indigenous and tribal peoples. Who, manage and take care of, guard 80% of our planet's biodiversity. So it's just really important.
Thank God they're there, because if they weren't, we probably wouldn't have any by now.
Exactly.
And we'd be in worse shape than we already are.
Exactly.
And so I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. This is very important.
I appreciate the opportunity as well. And again, the support from the artist.
And, if there's anything that we can do, and we'll stay in touch. I've got your email, so we'll stay in touch. And, I invite your organization to be on Art for Your Cause. There are some benefits to it. You can work with artists and they can share your message.
But yes, we'd love to stay in touch. And I know we have your email as well, and we'll certainly look into other opportunities, if there are any, for collaboration or just raising awareness.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.